A wave of derision washed among the star lanes when anyone mentioned humans. Their rickety ships and mundane presence were the basis for court jokes among aliens. But deep in the roiling black of history's countless battles, a sleek warship manifested, a vessel that would forever silence the universe's laughter. For centuries, the galaxy's preeminent powers had reveled in a singular consensus, that humanity was unworthy of either fear or earnest coalition. Alien nobles and strategists would casually deride the Earthborn, lacing them into jokes at diplomatic feasts. For the most part, humans existed in a handful of Baroque enclaves and created little of any true significance. Its military was reduced, it was said, to weathered frigates and high-minded volunteers, sufficient perhaps to police an asteroid belt against space pirates, but no match for the star-spanning war fleets that patrolled the civilized space. That dismissal wasn't entirely unwarranted. Records in the Zalori archives documented humanity's fraught expansion. A small fleet of warp-capable vessels navigating cautiously out into the cosmos, armed with second-hand technology either acquired through trade agreements or purchased on the quiet side of the black market. The human engineers, hard at work, had not been formally educated on advanced alien theory. Their starships tended to wear the label of suitable for cargo, more than ready for battle. So, as the empires of the galaxy jockeyed for territory and influence, humans persisted as an afterthought, weak enough, at best, to ignore, or, more often, to lampoon. This atmosphere of derision made life miserable for human envoys scuttling through the corridors of alien capitals. At best, they may receive condescending smiles and unimportant trade treaties. At worst, they were met with mockery, cold shoulders, and sardonic talk of unwashed earthlings and their quaint attempts at starflight. But every sneer, every half-veiled insult, only stoked a quiet resolve in some quarters of humankind. An ambition rooted itself. If the galaxy evinced such scorn, why not show it so? Was the insert fatally misguided? On a distant industrial moon known as Straszhov 7, an embarrassing scrap of rock that almost no one bothered to chart, a ragtag band of underfunded human engineers started to congregate. Their gruff visionary, known only as the chief designer, drew and salvaged from alien wrecks, recycled modules from broken Terran freighters, and toyed with incomplete knowledge of xenotech. They set out with one goal in mind: to design an exceptional thing. A warship that would set itself apart from the very limited capacities that Earth has become renowned for. It seemed a joke of a task, not least because these tinkerers had no grand endowments, no official backings by governments, and no delusions about the superiority of alien armadas. But these people were dreamers. Amid the din of hydraulic presses whose clanking never stopped, and the whir of jury-rigged power generators, they forged hull plates from layered alloys never tested beyond laboratories. They incorporated propulsors torn from mangled pirate ships and combined them with Earth's warp drives. Where specialist components were unavailable, they jerry-rigged, using a combination of clever software hacks and mechanical ingenuity. Slow, feverish years, and a starship skeleton grew under a broad electromagnetic umbrella, shielding it from the prying eyes of alien surveillance satellites. Meanwhile, the galaxy's great powers inched closer to war. Long-standing alliances frayed under a strain of competition for resources and ideological differences. Some hegemons, like the Trillian hierarchy and the Drex Dominion, sported armadas that could swallow whole human colonies. Subspace channels rang with news of a possible conflict. Were an all-out confrontation to break out, Earth would be caught in the crossfire, helpless, unprepared, and dwarfed. Upon tinges of hearing such rumors, many within the Terran government worked to erect survival bunkers or to send calls for neutrality to the largest alien empires. But on Straszhov 7, the men and women working in secret had no time for official appeals. They hammered rivets, debugged code, and offered half-serious, half-frenzied toasts about saving humanity. As cosmic tensions mounted, their own timeline hurtled ahead. Final assembly of the ship was nearing completion. They had pushed it, tested its interior systems, under extremes that filled every deck with a surprising synergy. Earth's toughest engineering, cohabiting with stolen xenotechnology never intended for human hands. A monstrous patchwork, skeptics might have called it. To the engineers, it was their magnum opus, the shape of tomorrow's defiance. A coterie of tireless tacticians emerged from these efforts, analyzing thousands of alien combat logs. The hours turned into months in dissecting how an advanced Drex battleship had cruised through conventional fleets. They examined trillion swarmcraft and patterns of massed planetary bombardments. In response, these human artificers evolved the timeless impossible tactics: dancing insertion plans, brinksmanship jumping, and exploit crawls, all IDX through queries hidden in the algorithmic blind spots of particular ally navies. If successful, these unconventional gambits could be deadly, especially when pitted against adversaries accustomed to clear-cut, strength-on-strength battles. Beyond Strasov 7's orbit, the galaxy's vitriol continued unabated. Pundits on the capital world of Trelia stated that humanity was better suited to menial resource extraction. On the planet Ozzer Delta, comedic performances mocked human bravado as hapless Earthlings fumbled at warp commands. That type of haughty humor bounced across every major data hub. But such digs never pierced the ears of the people assembling the secret warship in the gloom of the industrial moon. And if they did, it just would have made them more resolute. Then, a trigger event disrupted the delicate peace between the empires. The Trillian hierarchy had made a bold attack on an asteroid field claimed by the Drex Dominion. Several smaller polities scrambled to take sides or stay neutral. The battles that ensued were cataclysmic, whole star systems set ablaze. The avaricious, technocratic Trillian hierarchy snagged wins. Billions of civilians fled, seeking shelter wherever possible. Earth's territory was near disputed shipping lanes, so Terran officials had to prepare for the storm's arrival. Humanity, in the galaxy it believed, teetered on the edge of subjugation or destruction. But in the silence before that storm arrived on Earth, a warship soared from Strasov 7's hidden yards. It was larger than ordinary human craft, and it bristled with strange protrusions that sparkled silver in the star's pale glow. They were awakened by a nearly sentient hum of sensors. Shield generators powered up, weaving layers of protective fields that distorted heat signatures and deflected standard scanning patterns. The behemoth soared, leaving behind the dust-choked factories and etching its name into every frightened or hopeful pair of eyes that watched from behind closed bunker doors. No official name had been widely reported for this vessel. It did not have a big christening ceremony, but to its builders, one whispered name reigned: the Vanguard. Only in this ship would be about to cross cosmic battle lines, forging alliances with desperate survivors, or even sowing chaos in the ranks of Trillian or Drex armadas. Earth's fate, once tied to vacant diplomacy, now took form in the cold metal and burning thrusters of an untried war vessel. The stage was set. The Trillian hierarchy's eyes were turned toward easy conquest, dreadnoughts that would be unstoppable for the Drex Dominion. And all had assumed that any conflict with humans would be a petty footnote. They were wrong. For while the aliens laughed and called humans inferior, one last piece of the puzzle was about to come into view. The Vanguard launched itself into the war-ravaged people of that void, containing a crew of eager hearts who sought to show that the galaxy's condescension was a fatal misstep. And so the next wave of galactic combat began, and none could know how deeply the fate of entire civilizations would be reshaped by a single warship. The Dominion's first engagement with the newly unveiled human warship took place along a bruised trade route bordering the Valian Rim. Refugees from devastated neutral worlds had tried to escape into human space, but their ships could not outrun Trillian raiding squadrons. The Dominion, hoping to cut off Trillian expansion, had deployed a triad of destroyers to intercept these squads and appropriate the avenue for themselves. The result was a deadly free-for-all between Trillian corvettes, Dominion cruisers, and panicked civilian vessels. The Vanguard dropped into that chaos. Its arrival was unnoticed at first, drowned in the tumult of whirling lasers and ballistic rounds. Trillian corvettes, colorfully striped with dull gold, swept in flaking patterns of blip and destroy to extralatinate Dominion frigates. And the battered refugee vessels trembled in the vacuum, waiting for a chance to go unnoticed. Then there was a volley of bright pulses followed by the dissolution of 2 Trillian corvettes within seconds. Their kill lights snuffed out so suddenly that the Dominion sensors were unable to determine the culprit. The Dominion comm channels lit up with confusion. Who had fired that barrage? The admirals of the Dominion hoped it was an allied secret force. New pulses piled into a Dominion cruiser, punching through its side plating and venting it to vacuum. Panic ignited. Not even Trillian advanced weaponry could so blithely cripple an armored cruiser. Amidst scrambled transmissions seeking explanation, a massive wisp materialized on scanners. The Vanguard, an unauthorized vessel ideogram, moving directly into the heart of the melee. Thank you, Trillian Commander. Realizing an unidentifiable factor had entered the combat zone, he called for immediate identification. Simultaneously, the Dominion's ranking officer started sending a barrage of warnings. Planet-based watchers caught sight of human transponder codes and erupted in fits of incredulous laughter. Human, they chortled. Impossible. There. Not even worth capturing, much less contending with. But the rubble of corvettes narrated a different tale. And yet, both Trillian and Dominion tacticians felt a straightforward kill lay ahead of them. They pressed their advantage, creating pincer attacks and striking the Vanguard's largest energy signatures. Past human ships had been notoriously sluggish, with bolted-together armor that fell to sustained fire. Trillian corvettes had flashed in from port, hoping to shred the unprepared newcomer. Dominion cruisers came in from starboard with rail cannons activated. 4. Subsistence laughter sounds through the encrypted links. Even some alien commanders hoped to capture the human craft's last moments as comedic relief for the front lines. But when the first missiles swept toward the Vanguard, fizzling bursts of a glittering shield sprang to life, repelling or absorbing each strike with little consequence. Advanced jamming fields scrambled the lock-ons on the Trillian corvettes. Tucked away behind a shield, the Dominion cruisers expected only puny return fire, and were blindsided by a massive barrage of multi-spectrum beams so carefully modulated that nothing so crude as armor plating was able to stop it. Within seconds, half of the Dominion flanking line was broken. Trillian corvettes, disoriented by the jamming, crashed into each other. The Vanguard shifted the frequency of its beams, adjusted shield densities. Every second it seemed to adapt. The tactician on board analyzed real-time readouts gained from salvaged alien tech, identifying weaknesses in every ship. Specialized drones then flitted from hidden bays, attaching themselves to the undersides of heavier cruisers, disabling their propulsion from within. The whole dogfight was reversed, with the survivors in shocked disbelief. A single human craft was methodically tearing them apart. Shortly thereafter, the battered refugee vessels fled the combat envelope, signaling their gratitude toward the Vanguard. Confusion on the Trillian and Dominion channels turned to terror. The laughter dissipated. Captains bellowed contradictory orders, some retreating entirely. In the silence following the final discharge of weapons, the Vanguard floated amid figureheads and hulled wreckage, victorious. The refugees were allowed to continue along the ancient trade route. The story quickly spread to shocked witnesses across multiple star systems. They have a new warship, whispering. It wiped out entire wings of Trillian and Dominion craft. Disbelief reigned. Others said that it was an Earth propaganda rumor. Others cited lucky flukes. But the evidence was too extensive. Logs from the Trillian fleet, partial black box recordings from Dominion cruisers, the testimony of awestruck refugees. And the mockery that had once accompanied human ships was tinged with nervous wonder. The following wave of battle accelerated the shift in perception for the galaxy. For years, the Trillian hierarchy had claimed unstoppable expansion along the frontier worlds. So, when the Vanguard arrived at the Quessen Prime siege, where Trillian dreadnoughts were set for a final bombardment, no one thought humanity's measly aggression would make a difference. But the impervious Trillian blockade was undone when the Vanguard struck in a precisely coordinated strike on the shield generators of the dreadnought's orbital ring. But released from Trillian's iron grasp, Quessen's defenders struck back with a ferocity that forced the dreadnought to withdraw. The aliens who thought that they were masters of the battlefield were once again brought to humiliating defeat at the hands of a mere human warship. And as these improbable victories piled up, the major powers scurried for answers. In the Trillion capital city, Grand Admirals mapped the Vanguard's every known engagement, determining that the vessel must be utilizing stolen prototypes from advanced species. The Dominion's war councils insisted the humans were colluding with clever black market engineers, or had perhaps uncovered an ancient dreadnought left behind by a lost civilization. For that was the only way, they reasoned, for humans to have made such jumps in technology on their own. The real reason, speculation aside, was simpler. Raw human perseverance, layered with improbable creativity. The crew of the Vanguard hailed from every corner of Earth's diaspora, engineers who had studied alien wreckage, pilots who had flown cargo routes through dangerous territory, strategists who had analyzed millennia of recorded battles. Every time Trillion or Dominion captains attempted an established tactic, the Vanguard's command staff undercut it with an unforeseen twist. That ingenuity extended beyond the simple nature of firefights. During one confrontation next to Volcaron's maze-like asteroid belts, the Vanguard purposefully allowed a Dominion squadron to follow it into a narrow pass. As the Dominion vessels pursued, the humans triggered a concealed chain reaction that crumbled portions of the belt, trapping or crushing the Dominion craft. On one occasion, the Vanguard hacked the comms of an entire Trillion flotilla, tricking them into shooting each other up under friendly signals. Dumbfounded survivors could only observe a warship sailing buttoned up and unscathed. These episodes inspired not only fear, but outrage in the alien powers. How was it that these primitive humans could so deftly manipulate the battlefield? That comedic cockiness morphed into bitter frustration. The Lords of Trillia demanded a great joint offensive to trap the Vanguard. The Dominion Sultanates made similar calls, pleading for fleets to unite to eradicate Earth in one fell swoop, their hope to shatter the warship supplies. Behind closed doors, smaller states joining the Trillion or Dominion cause complained. If the undeterred navies couldn't stop one rebellious vessel, what could they really do? As momentum grew, the Trillion and Dominion forces had hatched an ambitious trap. They deployed fleets around one strategic nexus, the Gadron Gate, a wormhole that connected key shipping routes. Intelligence suggested that the Vanguard could pass through the region on its pursuit to rescue more trapped worlds. If the humans try to cross, they'll find themselves trapped in a ball of overwhelming firepower. Alien admirals crowed that no subterfuge or clever stratagem could rival good old numerical superiority. But the humans, who learned of the threat through subspace infiltration, understood the inevitability. Allies were indeed vital in pulling the Gadron Gate. And yeah, it was stuffed full of Trillion and Dominion fleets salivating for vengeance. And so the Vanguard's commander, cool, deeply pragmatic, prepared the crew for a confrontation that could eclipse any skirmish so far. They knew the size of the armies arrayed against them. They also saw an opportunity to deal a devastating blow to their enemies' morale. After all, if a single warship could eliminate the combined force of several alien empires in an open space confrontation, the entire galactic pecking order would be shaken. On those last few days leading up to the fatal crossing, the ship's engineers ramped up system upgrades. Shield emitters redone for swift frequency shifts, anti-fighter turrets tested to the max with overload tests, infiltration drones packed with custom-coded viri to scramble Trillion command protocols. The tension among the crew of the Vanguard was tangible. It was the first time they had faced multiple capital ships in the same moment. Meanwhile, 100 alien channels, mocking commentary, returned. Trillion pundits scorned the humans for walking into their funeral pyre. Dominion loyalists boasted of the new anti-beam coatings layered on their dreadnoughts, confident they would brush aside the Vanguard's ordnance. Privately, however, dread lingered beneath their bravado. Each captain remembered the lifeless husks of their comrades' ships after brief encounters with this relentless dreadnought. This time, they told themselves, they had the upper hand. This time, the humans would crack. It was the making of a mass-market drama of extreme proportions. The Gadron Gate, full of battleships, carriers, frigates, and satellites, all aimed at one goal: destroy the warship that had reduced the mightiest fleets in the galaxy to fools. From the perspective of 1,000 observers, the result was inevitable. How could a single ship, however clever, withstand a horde of battle-tested star warships thirsting for vengeance? As Earth dispatched its last transmissions, People on the planet gazed upward at star maps, knowing that an entire galaxy was watching. If the Vanguard died, the last shred of dignity that humans held in the eyes of alien empires would fall with it. If it won, well, the universe might never laugh at Earth again. The conflict rocketed to a peak, the tension denser than planetary crust. The impenetrable phantasms of alien superiority had begun to fracture, but the death blow remained to be delivered. The Gadron Gate region swam with the fortress city of warships. Enormous Dominion dreadnoughts, each shaped like a heavy dagger, kept a tight orbit. Trillion carriers, all spires on top, drifted in wedge formations, turreted fighter bays bristling. In the gaps in between, lines of smaller support craft and corvettes paced nervously to and fro, scanning along the void for any sign of an incoming target. Endless rows of cannons, missile tubes, and energy arrays awaited, locked and loaded. Alien admirals met at a command node near the gate, inside a chamber of tinted glass and hollow projections. Their confidence rose based on the belief that no single warship was faster than so many guns. Some apparent with casual bravado. A Trillion general bragged about turning the Vanguard's hull into a trophy for a museum. A Dominion overlord, her lacing voice oozing contempt, vowed to drop the humans' mutilated carcasses on Earth in a final educational prank. As the hour of the final approached, they prepared to destroy any fool who dared approach. The moment that the Vanguard emerged from its warp drive on the outskirts of the gate, the whole blockade snapped to attention. The sensor arrays blinked as they found the new target, confirming that it was the human warship that had been so mysterious up until this point. A silence, near reverent, descended on the channels. Suddenly, just as dramatically, the Trillion and Dominion fleets unleashed a carefully orchestrated barrage. Beam cannons scrawled arcs of sizzling plasma across the darkness, and waves of missiles ignited the starfield in glaring bursts. The Vanguard, overwhelmed by the stark magnitude of the attack, appeared small in a vast ocean of flame. But those initial volleys met a whirling barrier, a sophisticated screen of shields that seemed to shudder like layers of glasses overlapping. The warship twisted and turned through the storm, using thruster burns timed to the microsecond. Some explosions struck home, causing the Vanguard's hull to shimmer with residual heat. Other missiles were jammed or detonated prematurely by localized interference fields. Onlookers on the alien side looked on in disbelief. How had the humans not been annihilated in that first wave of destruction? Unfazed, Trillion carriers deployed whole squadrons of fighter bombers. Sleek and predatory, they swept forward, each pilot hungry to take the kill that would restore their species' honor. Dominion dreadnoughts trained railguns that launched slugs bigger than human starships of the old time, each one capable of punching through even major capital ships. Corvette lights flashed and warped, a swarm of them circling the Vanguard in a murderous ring tightening around the ship. If number of weapons meant anything, the humans were toast. But the Vanguard struck a clever, deadly blow. A barrage of infiltration drones hidden as star debris. These small craft latched onto the underside of Trillion ships, while the Karas and Corvettes fixated on the main hull. Within moments, entire carrier decks erupted in showers of sparks as vital control lines were severed or overridden. Fighter bombers were launched with no fire control data. Some bumped into each other in the chaos. In the meantime, Dominion rail slugs, perfectly timed by the tactician on the Vanguard, were tricked by subtle thruster feints into blasting Trillion vessels that had drifted into their fields of fire. All hell broke loose getting through the blockade. Yet the onslaught did not let up. Battered units had to be ordered back into formation by alien admirals. More waves of missiles surged. The Dominion suzerain himself commanded a cannonade from the largest dreadnought's primary battery, a particle beam said to cleave planetoids in twain. On the Vanguard bridge, alarms screamed. The engineer was diverting all vital power away from secondary systems over to the primary shield grid, praying that it would absorb the impact. The beam hit with terrifying impact, searing over the Vanguard's starboard flank and gouging molten rivulets in the hull. For a moment, it looked like the ship might fly apart, but it held together. A half-dozen compartments lost pressure. Crew members rushed to impose emergency seals and maintain life support. Before the dreadnought was able to fire again, the Vanguard struck back. A storm of high-energy projectiles, each wrapped in a disruptive plasma field, streaked across the distance. Again and again the dreadnought's outer hull glowed as it attempted to repel the intrusion. But the last rocket had found a weak spot, exploding nearby a node that cools a reactor. The subsequent meltdown destroyed half the dreadnoug's power grid, entering it into a power-down sequence. Another Goliath succumbed to the human's guile. Now battered and partially pinned, the Vanguard turned to angle itself deeper into the blockade's heart. More Dominion cruisers rushed into formation around it, shield geometry overlapping in a vain effort to bucket. The Warship, redomiciled Trillion battlegroups with temporary or partial flight decks still in service, launched new fighter wings. Central satellite system of the blockade locked on the Vanguard with meltdown-grade warheads. The tactician could hear the noose tightening. They could not hold the kill zone indefinitely. Taking a high-risk gamble, the commander called for an abrupt upwards diagonal, aiming for the cluster of satellites. With a warp trick all its own, the ship blinked in microjumps that kept the blockade's weapon systems target-locking a split second behind. Every jump brought them closer to the satellites and ignored corvettes' strafing runs. Then, at the span of a single concussive volley, the Vanguard obliterated the satellites that held the blockade net in place. The way to the gate gradually opened. Seeing their blockade anchor melt down, the alien admirals panicked. The Gadron Gate was not merely strategic. It was symbolic of their unified strength. Without it, Trillion and Dominion plans for the war would implode. And yet those admirals still would not give in. They threw all hands on deck, including some new monstrous flagship that was rumored to be indomitable. The pride of this warlord swelled as their capital ship burst through the blockade, determined to administer the coup de grace. The flagship overshadowed even the largest dreadnoughts. Its four bore an enormous ramming prow, said to have sufficient shielding to plow through asteroid fields without so much as a scratch. Along its flanks bristled stubby heavy turrets that vomited ruinous arrays of beams. As soon as it showed up, it hammered the Vanguard from max range, inflicting crippling hull damage. The engineers' desperate repairs could barely keep up. One more blow, and maybe the entire warship would split open, venting every deck into the vacuum. Sparks flew at the Vanguard's bridge. The voice of the tactician trembled as it updated target solutions. The commander, jaw-clenching, knew the delicate position. This flagship threatened to overwhelm every advantage you had so far. Evasive maneuvers were at best partial. There was just too much goddamned fire coming from that beast of a ship. And yet, a steely resolve infused the crew. They had come here to break the blockade, to put an end to the mockery that humans couldn't stand among the galaxy's great powers. Marshalling their remaining guile, they resorted to one last, desperate gambit, a sham systems failure. The Vanguard's thrusters sputtered as if malfunctioning, power readings on outside sensors plunging. The tactician sent out fake signals to indicate catastrophic damage. Sensing victory, the flagship bore down at full thrust, intent on grinding the humans against the Earth at point-blank range in an exhibition of invincible power. The kill was eagerly awaited by Trillion and Dominion observers. But the moment the flagship's hull blotted out the Vanguard, the clever bluff sprang into motion. The human warship woke inactive weapon banks, and she unleashed a focused attack at near point-blank range. Staggered alien tech integrated subtly in their systems helped them to align beam frequency for optimal devastation. The flagship's forward shields, caught unanticipated for such a sudden, pinpoint attack, fractured from the energy wave. The prow plating flared molten red and peeled back in a wave of plasma. Firing canisters detonated in tubes, sending roiling flames through the flagship's corridors and triggering chain reactions deep within. Taking advantage of the hole, the commander targeted the flagship's main reactor area. A second precision barrage pounded through damaged armor, penetrating to vital power conduits. In a moment of visceral, savage finality, the flagship's core flared to life. Explosions rippled up its spine, venting entire decks to vacuum. The shockwave rippled outward in a terrible way, and the Vanguard was forced to backpedal on lost thrusters to escape the worst of it. And then it was done. That unstoppable flagship, whose firepower had been sufficient to subjugate entire star clusters, died in a starburst of twisted metal and flame. The blockade scattered, afraid the next volley would be directed toward them. The few alien admirals aboard the surviving vessels could only gaze incredulously at readouts from their scanners. They had thrown every advantage at the humans: superior numbers, advanced technology, unflagging confidence, and had been methodically outmatched. In the abrupt quiet, the Vanguard drifted mangled but victorious, half its decks ruined by collisions and searing rays. It navigated first slowly, then deftly around debris fields and wreckage, gliding toward the Gadron Gate's glittering maw. None of the alien ships found a spine to intervene. Their admirals, confronted with the unrelenting creativity of the humans, eventually stopped firing, though some made hopeless gambling shots. The cost had been too great, their morale too shattered, and the human warship shot into the gate, unchained to its mission. Across star systems near and far, real-time feeds broadcasted the humiliating collapse of the blockade. The bitter ridicule once directed at humanity disappeared. It was followed up with a dazed respect, and in some quarters, primal terror. Had the galaxy known an upset was within reach, they might never have laughed at Earth's expense. Word of the decisive victory traveled faster than the warp shockwaves themselves. Minor species that had long been ruled by Trillian or Dominion overlords celebrated, viewing a bright new future in the human success. The great hierarchies that had defined galactic politics started to tremble. Where once whole worlds chuckled at the very thought of human might, they were now assessing the idea of alliances, or at least respectful distance. A wave of fatigue washed over the Vanguard's bridge crew. Their warship was badly injured, but still afloat. While medics treated the wounded, the engineers sealed cracks to stop catastrophic decompression. The tactician sagged in relief, data screens still jittering with the detritus of the victory. The commander wiped his eyes and looked out the viewport. Gadron Gate. They had done it. The unstop-cabled DRA-locked blockade, a whole system's worth of mocking foes, lay in ruins behind them. And in that, the resolution carried a thunderous finality. Once known as the cosmic clowns of an intergalactic theater, humans had earned a place in the history books by showing an almost obsessive ability to adapt and innovate. They had been wrong to smirk at Earth's name. The rest of the galaxy now understood. The inextinguishable fantasies of alien superiority lay broken, overturned by the final word that those who laugh last laugh best, and in this case, last word was human. The months after the fall of the Gadron Gate blockade sent tidal waves of change across every corner of known space. Notable among them were the shattered Trillian carriers, which merely floated dead in quarantine orbits, and Dominion dreadnoughts that had slinked home to fortress systems, crippled beyond rapid repair. The name of the triumphant warship, Vanguard, as intelligence nets at last reported, was spoken in awed tones by weeks of lesser starfaring species. Where once humans were an afterthought, now their strength loomed as some kind of force now beyond ridicule, and not to be so easily dismissed. They became minor empires, once aligned with Trillian or Dominion might, but now have been willing to consider quiet diplomacy with Earth, some to discuss commercial pacts, others non-aggression guarantees. In fact, the idea of a human alliance was hope in many quarters. Countries that had been beaten down for centuries and looked on with condescension could now behold an image of endurance. Others volunteered their repair docks or raw materials, seeking to ingratiate themselves with the new, unconventional actor on the galactic stage. On the embattled Vanguard, the days after victory were filled with relief and grief. The cost of victory was terrible, the casualty lists, everywhere reminding all that there was no triumph. Hallways showed scorch marks and patchwork plating. Several compartments were still sealed off, their air suffused with the odor of chemical fires. Engineers worked day and night to maintain life support, and the tactician did its best to assimilate the flood of communication from friendly and neutral entities. Distant control centers on Earth sent messages hailing the crew as heroes, that many of the cynical people who predicted failure were now openly praising the project. While the accolades poured in, the commander was visiting the medical bay to pay his respect to those severely wounded. Soft words passed between them, no bravado, only gratitude and the feeling that they had altered a cosmic order with their actions. The chief designer, The fantasist who had assembled the vanguard from wreckage and dreams privately allowed that they hadn't quite anticipated this level of popularity even themselves. They had laughed at us, the designer whispered. Now the whole galaxy has to take us seriously. In the capital of Trelia, the mood was dim. Snarling aristocrats, who'd previously been so quick to vilify humanity, were left haphazardly pinning proposals to protect their patch. Rumors of infighting emerged. Furious generals demanded new leadership after the fiasco. The Dominion did hardly better. Angry warlords pointed fingers at one another for not taking short-sighted Earth seriously. Intermittent uprisings broke out across their slave labor worlds, emboldened by the belief that if humans could pierce the blockade, then maybe rebellion wasn't so pointless. No even decisive battle assured universal peace. The fleets of the Trillian hierarchy remained strong. The Dominion retained massive resources. Tens of thousands of star systems had known only oppression for hundreds of years, not likely to shake off that yoke in a single night. But the fiasco at the Gadron Gate had shown that no empire was invincibly unassailable. The door to an alternate future, where humans walked as equals rather than beneath contempt, was propped ajar. And so the vanguard continued to sail. Nursed back from a battered hull, rebuilt compartment by compartment, it found its way coursing across war-torn sectors, helping some of the most vulnerable. On far-off worlds, children whispered tales of the human warship that had stood up to the mightiest powers of the galaxy. Politicians of all kinds debated whether to placate or befriend these audacious Terrans. Not all welcomed them with open arms. Some still simmered for revenge, but none could dismiss them as trifles ever again. Historians would come to recognize the day the vanguard broke the Gadron Gate blockade as a watershed moment. The moment when centuries of snickering contempt for humans crumbled, giving way to a desperate respect. When discussions of primitive Earthlings had been replaced by strategic committees studying how to best negotiate or defend against the ingenuity of Terran engineers and tacticians. But for those who experienced it, the memory struck a more personal chord. They remembered the derisive voices over the star lanes and the victorious silence that came after. They sensed the intangible perturbations of cosmic oligopolies, the new ententes taking shape in the void opened by Trillian and Dominion disgrace. Most of all, they remembered the crumpled outline of that one warship, hewn from debris and imagination, triumphantly resting upon wreckage which had once represented the galaxy's irrefutable power. And with that, the age of unqualified ridicule directed at humanity was over. The echoes of foreign laughter faded into ambiguous silence. In its absence, a different chorus rose. Not applause or reverence, but a wary wonder. Recognition that humans, after surviving the cosmos laughter, had created a future where derision became only the warm-up act to irrepressible determination. The Vanguard's legacy would live on, a reminder to every starfaring race that despised underdogs could, if they withstood enough hardship, redraw the rules of warfare and claim a place among the brightest stars. The laughter was gone, replaced by a abiding truth. After this day, no one would doubt Earth's might, or forget the warship that silenced a galaxy's jeers forever.